Right. Good evening, everybody. I see a couple of people have joined us today. Thank you for sparing us your time this evening, and I'll hand over to Peter to start the session.
Thank you, Krista. If you could just pop up my first slide, if that's okay. For those of you who don't know me, Peter Iliff, I'm the chair of BAPO, and I am an orthotist based in Leeds for Take Care Medical. We have a couple of staff orthotists on preceptorship there, so this is a topic I'm really interested in, and I would go so far as say with every year that passes, I've probably become more passionate about the subject because it's fundamentally so important. So welcome everyone for the session. We've got a range of speakers. We'll move through the programme as Krista's advertised, and as we do, those speakers will introduce themselves. You don't want to hear me trying to make a job of that. So if we could just have the next slide, please, Krista. A lot of you will be probably familiar with, if not this slide, then the content. It's not the first time I've used it. And I just thought I'd step off with this one. At HCPC, I've demonstrated they did an audit of registrants from all the AHP groups between 2013 and 2018. And they came up with the data that showed that people were deregistering. They were leaving the register within the first 4 years of entering the register. So obviously it would be leveraged towards those newly qualified folk. And unfortunately, 1 in 8 prosthetists and orthotists left the register in that time, which was the highest amongst all the groups. The other point I've popped on there is that it predates COVID. So things may not be better and may in fact be worse, because obviously COVID has had an impact on the workforce in all sectors, but I think has in some cases made things particularly difficult. So that snapshot predates COVID. We have an issue. We know from the report that there's strong evidence linking to professional size, but we will remain a small profession. Even if we doubled or trebled our numbers, we'd still be a small profession. So we're not going to change that. We also know that retention is strongly associated with CPD opportunities. Okay, we can work on that, but that can be difficult to deliver in the current environment, and it's not really what we're here to talk about this evening. What we're here to talk about this evening is preceptorship, and there's a lot of variety about preceptorship, but we know that good preceptorship does feed in to retention, so that is a really important message. And those of you that have been involved in this field will have experienced that, and you will have seen what good preceptorship can deliver in terms of anchoring people into their career. So we have the next slide, please. The next data is just some numbers around from the report that Staffordshire University did for BAPO. We're going to publish this later in the year, but we have released it through the NHS England event that was held in June. And what that shows there is probably reasons people were thinking of leaving the profession. And particularly if you look at the reasons at the bottom end there, I think you can well imagine how these could be concerns for those in their early years or going through a transition. So the profession isn't what they expected. Work-life balance can be challenging. Caseload, particularly if we're not prepared for the career that we've launched into, lack of autonomy, inadequate length of appointments, that all those things would add stress if you were not supported during your early years. And this is obviously, we have seen that high level of people leaving the profession in those early years. So that gives you a bit of context. We'll just pop on to the next slide. So this is just my introduction. This is me setting a bit of context for this evening. We know that preceptorship is vital for retention. I would argue that improvement in this area is relatively achievable. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think we've got control over our destiny in this area, where in some other respects, in terms of building complex career frameworks and the career journeys, they are more difficult to achieve. But I think we've got reasonable agency in this area. So I would argue that it's really important that we use the term preceptorship frequently. We talk about it amongst ourselves. In centres, we don't make it one person's responsibility. We spread the benefit. Speaking to people in early years, they like very often to work with more than one person. They don't want to have somebody standing over their shoulder. They like to hear different voices. They like to see different perspectives. We can look to other allied health professions groups to see models of best practice, which have been established for longer. And I, at Take Care, where I work during the majority of my time, really benefited from putting our preceptors into trust programs, which helps anchor them in the location where they're working and helps them see other AHPs where they go through a program and train together. So I think they're just some thoughts for people. And now we're going to expand the conversation now. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, and that's Krista Asoluka. Krista, you're just going to give us a BAPO Preceptorship update.
Right. Thank you, Peter, for that really good context that you've given to the conversation today. And I'm quite excited to share with you what we have been doing as an association with regards to preceptorship. So give me a moment, let me share my screen. There we go. Right. So, like I said, my name is Krista Asoluka, and I work with the Education Practice Development Office with BAPO. And over the past year, I have been privileged enough to work alongside Sandra Sexton and 5 other people on a team to sort of develop what early career resources and guidance would be for prosthetists and orthotists. This framework, or toolkit, if you like, is basically for newly qualified, international students, international recruits, and a bunch of other people who identify as preceptees. It's also for preceptors as well, to understand exactly how best to guide preceptees. It is for preceptorship leads who want to develop preceptorship within their trust, companies, organizations, and most importantly, it's also for employers, as we have found that preceptorship offerings are quite a good incentive from employers for new graduates and anybody who is just getting into the profession as well. So what will my slides be covering today? So like I said, over the past year, we did a couple of things to try to get to where we are today. One of them was to try to investigate what career resources were actually available at the time. And from that report, we were able to develop a guidance framework to address those findings and meet up with the challenges that we found. We also have put together some best practices and have gotten a really beautiful story from one of our very own to kind of inspire people who are in the first year of practice, to kind of give them an insight of what they could potentially be as either a prosthetist and orthotist. So I'm hoping that most of this presentation will excite you and get you ready for what we really have in terms of preceptorship in the coming years. So what were our findings? I will walk you through a kind of a summary of the themes and findings from this report. This report was done in a 3-part investigation, which included a scoping review of the literature, a survey, which was part and parcel of the workforce survey that we carried out alongside Staffordshire University, and a focus group discussion with new graduates and people within first year of practice. So an emerging theme, as we can see on the slide, from the scoping review was that we found there wasn't really a lot of resources or literature on early careers, specifically for prosthetists and orthotists. And even within what we did find, we found that there were gaps because they're quite generalized. There were things like the flying start and the step to work, which has been developed alongside the NHS. We also found out there's a need for practice-based learning to increase confidence. And confidence is a word that we'll see across this whole preceptorship and early career framework, because it's really what we're trying to promote. And like Peter said, if we have confident individuals, we have people who will eventually want to stay within the profession. So this little thing right here is part from the survey. And it was asking the participants, about 105 of them, what exactly would you want your career to look like if post-graduation? So this was asked about apprentices and students. And as you can see here, quite from ascending order down to the lowest, people have an appetite for different areas within prosthetics and orthotics. What was interesting for me was that some people right out of uni want to go into advanced practice or become dual practitioners. Now, understanding where our workforce wants to be is really important to align their career goals, because it's one thing to support them into a new role. It's one thing to get them interested, because what exactly do they want to do in the next 5 years? If what we're supporting them for doesn't align to their career goals, then it wouldn't really make sense. So this kind of gives us a scope of where people are and where their appetite is. This little other section right here, as you can see, gave us a summary of early career supports amongst first year of final year students, apprentices, and first year of practice people. So we found out that about 32% of these people felt extremely confident that their courses from their tertiary institutions had prepared them for the workplace. 53% of these people felt moderately confident that they did a pretty good job on their first job application. 57% reported no support at all for pursuing a job, CV writing, and things like that. Now, these are where the numbers really get interesting, is that 29% of these people, only 29%, about 100 people, did say that they felt that they transitioned into the workforce extremely well. And as you go lower, it gets more interesting, because only 18% of these people, 1 year into their working, said that they felt extremely confident. Now, these two numbers really are where we want to increase in terms of preceptorship. Can we get people to be onboarded better into their new roles? Can we support them better so that they find the transition good enough? And after the first year of practice, they would say that, oh, I was really extremely confident to take on the tasks that I was given. And then we took this survey and we took it to this focus group, about 5 people. And we had a conversation. And just to give context, the cohort that participated in this focus group discussion had done their undergraduate studies during COVID, or had their final year during COVID. So pandemic was a really big topic and theme within that focus group discussion, and how it affected their placement opportunities, how it affected the kind of support they received in their first year of practice. Some people did say that finding a job was quite difficult. And like I said, it might not be because the jobs were not available. It's because what the career goals were not aligning to what they were seeing. So they struggled to find that, and they had to cope with rejection. And some of them were, it's for any graduate, that's a lot of things to go through. We also then went into transition challenges as well. So the stress of starting a new responsibility, they had lack of structured training. That was a theme that was consistent from both the surveys and the focus group discussion as well. People also said that dealing with complex cases really dampened their morale because they didn't have the support that they needed. And which brings me to workplace support as well. So some people found support from lecturers and seniors. Some people relied on experienced colleagues, but overall, there was no structure to their training. So we took all of this information and we built on existing work. We took the work of Andrew Nicol and his team, who had developed a preceptorship in prosthetics and orthotics. and updated it based on HCPC's Principles for Preceptorship as well. And this was following a consultation from different professional bodies. So some of these things were the foundation or the building blocks to which we decided to go about the next steps. Now, we found that there are core areas for early careers, and I call them early careers because it encompasses just more than preceptorships. We found that the first area is pre-preceptorship. And while not very popular, pre-preceptorship is the initial phase of training or orientation that occurs before the person is officially starting off their new role. It is designed for individuals who are going to go into a preceptorship to understand exactly what they're going into. It's an onboarding process. So the same way any other company would onboard someone, get to know the team, get to know the facility, the tools, and what is what exactly. That's what you do within the pre-preceptorship. And then we have the preceptorship itself, which is now the buzzword that we're going on with this tonight, which is a more comprehensive hands-on phase of the professional training. So it involves working closely with experienced mentors or preceptors, as you'd like to call them, in a clinical or workplace setting. The third bit of early careers that we found was really, really also important is mentorship and guidance. And I'll go into this a little bit later in my slides. But we found that it's one thing to prepare one for work, help them build their confidence, but we also need a continuous place where people can develop their professional careers and goals as they go on in the profession. And it kind of is summed up as to why we're doing what we're doing in this little pretty graph here, is that we're trying to build resilience in our workforce. We don't want people discouraged. We want people to persevere through the struggles. And resilience comes from competence and confidence. Competence, which we believe has been built within the tertiary institutions or their places of training, where you acquire skill and knowledge. Confidence, on the other hand, where it's a matter of growth and experience. And this is not something that can be taught. It's not something that can be given. It's something that one has to go through within a well-supported environment. So preceptorships, which is an important part of this because we need a structure to it, right? We didn't want people to just say, all right, so we need support, go have support. No, we've put out 6 particular places or 6 particular ways we feel that preceptorships should be done. So we have the goal setting, get an idea of where your newly employed member is, understand where they need support, and help structure their learning in a more structured manner. There should be a dedicated time for shadowing within their working, where they begin to see what other people do, how they work, what best practices would work for them as they learn. A time for observed practice, see how the preceptee is doing within their own clinics. So whether this be prosthetics or orthotics, they should be given the opportunity to be observed and also be able to reflect on their observed practice. There should be time for CPD. So while preceptorship might seem like a training program on its own, the need to continue to consult the evidence and the literature is important, and time should be set out for this as well. Some companies, as I've learned, have graduate training programs where they send out their preceptors to go learn a course or learn something new. That could be considered as CPD as well, and it's an important part to be added. We have the assessments and peer support, and I'm going to just dwell on peer support as well, because if you do have a support system outside your company where people can meet up with their fellow first years and think about how has work been going for you, what has your challenges been, and see how to combat them. So what have we developed in this regard? We have developed 2 beautiful resources. First is an early career guidance framework for prosthetics and orthotics, and it gives you an overview of what you're required to do. We've also put together best practices that we think would be beneficial for both preceptorship and for early careers as well. Most of these resources will be made available on a web page. They're still under development as we speak, but surely we'll send out more information about this in good time. So our career exemplar is from Dawn Croft. She is a prosthetist who has shared her story with us. She's had quite an interesting journey and has moved up the ladder of progression quite nicely. And we've used her story to inspire the next generation of prosthetist orthotists, to let them know that, contrary to popular opinion, there is progression in prosthetics and orthotics. You can decide what your career looks like, and you can fashion it the way that you think. All you need to do is to have passion and enjoy the work that you're doing. So her story will be made available as well on the website. And finally, almost at my last slide, will be about mentorship. In 2022, BAPO launched the mentorship platform, which essentially helps people network with other professionals within the profession, outside the profession, and is essentially there to help self-manage your career. When your preceptorship is done, you might feel like all the support has been taken away from you. The next step would be to get some sort of mentorship that is short-term, will help you align your goals and persevere through your career journey. I would say that if you wanted more information about this, this is the web link to this. We will make some of the slides available after the session, so you can always look back. There's a chat function as well, so if you have any questions about this, please do let me know. And like I like to say, I think preceptorships, pre-preceptorships and mentorship is a work in progress. We're not going to develop one big web page, make it static and say, yes, we've done the work, we've ticked the box. No, we're going to have something that's going to continually evolve to match where the profession is per time. So if you'd like to get in touch with me, here's my email address, and you want further information on BAPO, there's our website. We're also on social media. So if you do see a post from us promoting our preceptorship, please do like, share, and let other people know as well. Thank you.
So, Krista, thank you for that. So we'll move on now to get the update from HCPC. Mark Platt has kindly joined us this evening from the regulator. So I'd like to hand over to Mark just to introduce himself. And while he's doing that, Krista, if you could, oh, you've got the slides ready to go. You're ahead of me. So Mark, please introduce yourself.
Right, thank you, Peter, and thank you, Krista. As you introduced me, from the regulator, we sound so ominous, but I'm hoping through our presentation we show that the regulator is here to support as much as to regulate. And also, just to say, and I'm sure Amanda will echo this, that was really wonderful to hear. We're certainly seeing that we published the principles in a consultation response. And one of the things we're working on, which I'll do in my presentation, is a document with a bit more information on that. But to hear that you've already taken the bare bones Preceptorship Principles produced and run with them is brilliant. Really, really wonderful. So that's really pleasing to see and to hear. So my name is Mark Platt. I'm policy lead at the Healthcare Professions Council, or HCPC, and I've been leading on this work since last year. We developed these principles, and part of the reason for this being a tripartite presentation, so your professional body, your regulator, and then the NHS, represented NHS England, is that actually development of preceptorship is a tripartite exercise. We as the regulator see it as something we can support to improve the experiences, the careers of those that we regulate. I think the professional bodies have a role to play because you have the professional specific experience and expertise. And the NHS has the role because it provides the career frameworks, it provides often the operating frameworks that people work within. So getting those three things together, as we've done with this work, has been really key to doing that. And I think also that's exemplified by the presentation just seen from Krista too. Can I have the next slide, please? So I'll just do a little bit about HCPC for those of you who don't know. So we're a statutory regulator, professional regulator. That means we regulate healthcare professionals rather than healthcare provider organisations. We promote high quality professional practice. We regulate over 300,000 registrants across 15 different professions and 31 or 33, I always get this slightly wrong, I think it's 33 professional titles, of which prosthetists and orthotists are 2 of those titles. So we set standards for for professional education and training and practice. So anybody joining the register has gone through a program that we've approved or come through our international route. We approve education programs which professionals must complete to register with us. We keep a register of professionals. People on our register are known as registrants who must meet our standards. So I'm hoping most of you will be registered, or you might be training to become registered. We act if professionals on register don't meet those standards, and also we act to stop unregistered practitioners from using professional titles as a way of maintaining the integrity of the professions that we regulate. As I said, I think that one of the key things for us around this work and why it's important to us as a regulator is that we oversee sort of the entirety of the work that professions do. And so preceptorship fits into that because we see it as supporting people at key moments of transition. So we've already talked about the importance that preceptorship can play for newly qualified professionals. It's about people returning to practice after some time away. So that can be for parental leave, family care needs. It's also in this presentation that Peter came to yesterday at HCPC headquarters, for people coming to work in the UK for the first time via our international registration route. It's an important way for people to be supported, to understand the differences in the healthcare system in the UK to where they trained or where they came from, and also expectations that might be different of the patients and services as they work and care for. And then also other kind of key career progression points. I think has already been identified in Krista's presentation, but people taking on through promotion new responsibilities, or people changing work locations or changing the nature of the work they do. Preceptorship across all of those points of transition can be helpful to support people in getting and maintaining confidence in what they do. Can I have the next slide, please, Krista? So our principles, which Krista already had a bit, has a picture on one of her slides of the consultation response document. So we developed with stakeholder engagement and the consultation exercise that took place there autumn last year. We had a huge range of responses. We did a lot of pre-consultation engagement with professional bodies, and we had nearly 1,000 people who responded to our consultation. So we got a really good range of voices, expertise, and an interest in questions posed as part of the consultation. We used the feedback we got from those engagement exercises and consultation to revise the principles that we consulted on, and those were then approved by our council in February 23, so that's this February, and then they were published in March this year in that consultation report that Krista put up on the side. I don't know how to do it with Zoom. I'm all Teams person, so normally I'd post a link in there, but I'll send you the link, Krista, and then if you want to pass that around to people, they can get a copy of that document from our website. We've produced high-level principles. We've done that because we appreciate that the preceptorship is going to be different depending on your setting and your working arrangement. So we want to make sure our principles be applicable to as wide a range of our registrants as possible. Also, that we want them to be supportive to our regulatory infrastructure. Now, by that I mean they're not like our standards of conduct, performance, and ethics, or standards of professionalism. So they're not something that we can regulate to, but they are something that can support people in meeting those standards. So we see them as being complementary to the standards that people have to work to. As I've already said, we work with colleagues from professional bodies. We've also worked with colleagues from NHS England, but also from NHS authorities in the other devolved nations. We're hoping or looking forward to continuing those relationships with this work as it develops and progresses. Can I have the next slide, please, Krista? So just in terms of a headline, and if you download that document, you'll see there's a bit more detail in that response that we produced. So we've 5 principles. Each one covers a different aspect around preceptorship. So principle 1 is around organisational culture and preceptorship. In essence, what organisations need to do to support good preceptorship and develop a good culture. Principle 2 is around quality and oversight of preceptorship. So that's ensuring that there's good monitoring, evaluation of preceptorship programs and provision to make sure there's learning built into the process. Principle 3 is preceptee empowerment. I think Chris already mentioned, so preceptees are people who are receiving preceptorship, and that can be the one-to-one support, that can be through a program or a mixture of those, but making sure they feel they're able to feel part in, not quite in the driving seat, but they have a role to play in driving and pushing forward the preceptorship needs that they have. Principle 4 is around the preceptor role, and a key element of this is the people who support preceptors, preceptees, because preceptors themselves will have needs to ensure that they're supported to deliver and provide that support. Then Principle 5 is around delivering preceptorship programs, and sort of a top-line view about how the best way of delivering those is. So each principle, you'll see in that document, if you download it, has a set of series of recommendations about how that each statement can be best met. The principles, so colleagues working in large NHS organisations will know that preceptorship has traditionally been something that's used to support nurses and midwives. No longer, but that's, if you worked with nurses and midwives, they'll often talk about their preceptorship and how preceptorship supports them in these moments of transition for them. So our principles do connect with the NMC principles that's underlying nursing and midwifery preceptorship programs, but they are specific to AHPs. We've made sure that they reflect the different experience to the professions that we regulate, which are different to nursing and midwifery colleagues. And can I have my last slide, please? So in terms of next steps for us, so that document that Krista showed a picture of is on our website, but that was basically just our response to the consultation, giving an overview of what we had and what we decided to do as a consequence. Looking to publish a larger document later this month. It will have supporting information about how to use the principles, and also will include some case studies of preceptorship arrangements, both in terms of a UK, or rather the 4-country provision, but also then for individual professional bodies. So as you've seen the presentation that Krista gave, where professional bodies have preceptorship or preceptorships like programs, we'll reference those as well. There'll also be some supporting information on our web pages, so we'll put more information on there, but we'll try and keep those pages live as well, because I think one of the things we're appreciating is that we're at the beginning of a journey with preceptorship for adults, for allied health professionals, and so there'll be more stuff coming, I think, over the coming months and years. As I said, we're working with colleagues in the 4 systems to create and develop existing preceptorship offers. So we know, for example, there's some work going on in Wales to develop preceptorship offers for clinical scientists and biomedical scientists. Been working with colleagues in Scotland who have their Flying Start programme, but want to widen that and ensure that it takes on more allied health professionals. Also, key thing for us, and it came out from our consultation, is that unlike the NMC, a large number of registrants with HCPC work in non-NHS settings. So they work for private or independent providers, they work in the voluntary or charitable sector, or they work as independent providers themselves. So we want to make sure that we can provide something to support registrants who are working in those situations. That's another piece of work, and we're looking to progress that over the coming months. Some of you may be aware, but also we have our HCP professional liaison team who provides support at an organisational level. We'll be working with colleagues from that team to develop webinar and web content that they can use as part of their activities. Again, I'll send stuff around to Krista afterwards, but if your organisation wants to get the professional liaison teams come in and talk, then there's a way to contact them, and they will be providing information, or they'll be tailoring their information around preceptorship too. They also provide support. I think as Peter saw yesterday, they also have a specific module on supporting people who are coming to work in the UK for the first time. So that's how these things connect up. So preceptorship and supporting on those routes in. That's all from me. So I'm going to hand over to Amanda for the NHSE presentation. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mark. Very interesting. And a great piece of work. So Amanda, if as Krista uploads and gets you ready to go, would you kindly introduce yourself?
Thank you, Peter, and thank you to Krista and to Peter and to Sandra for all the work that they've done in the preceptorship space and working together. As Mark mentioned, this is a real tripartite way forward, and this is continual improvement and evolution as we go forward, so it makes it really exciting. So my name's Amanda Weaver. I am a physiotherapist, but I'm also the AHP Preceptorship Workforce Lead at NHS England Workforce Training and Education as part of the National AHP Preceptorship and Foundation Support Programme. And so I'll just introduce you to the work that we're doing and why this is so important going forwards, and how it links with the work that Krista has mentioned, and how we're linking work with the HCPC so that we can have that full approach to preceptorship from our regulator, from organisations and from professional bodies. So next slide, please. So it's really important that we think about where does this sit within the strategy moving forward. So preceptorship has actually been mentioned in the NHS long-term workforce plan. So we've got something here that we can hang our hats on with regards to preceptorship. So although it talks about recruitment and retention, and it talks about the increase by quite large numbers for some of our professions, it also mentions that good quality preceptorship for the wider workforce is key. And although it mentions nursing and midwifery specifically and their the NMC principles and the preceptorship frameworks, this is an iterative document, and the plan is that this document does get updated and reviewed every couple of years. So we will be making sure that the preceptorship work that we're doing for AHPs will be added into this in the future. It's also part of AHP's strategy for England, the AHP's Deliver strategy, because it talks about AHPs being in the right place at the right time with the right skills. And it talks about bridging that gap between education and work and optimizing confidence so that we've got a diverse AHP workforce for the future. So it's really important that whatever we're thinking about, that we've got this evidence-based and we've got this strategic background to what we're doing. And that's where we're at with preceptorship. Next slide, please. So we've heard why it's important, and actually Peter and Krista have mentioned, you know, this is also about thinking, how do we improve our retention within our professions, but also within the NHS? Now, although this slide is an NHS data slide, I'm quite aware we've got so many prosthetists and orthotists who work in private sector, providing NHS services, or work in the independent sector. But within the NHS, with the data that we've got, the leaver rates in the first 5 years are high. And in the first year alone, we're at 11%. But as we mentioned earlier, this varies for our AHP groups and is relatively very high for our prosthetists and orthotists. And what we're hearing is this is about workload, as Krista mentioned, but also about that work-life balance, about what people are wanting to move into. So moving away maybe from some of the more traditional full-time roles, clinical roles, wanting portfolio roles, and more flexibility with their working. We're hearing, and we've heard it loud and clear with what the evidence that Krista has shown about that continual development. But also what we hear is about people wanting to be valued, part of a team, and feeling like they belong in their organisation. Next slide, please. The HCPC have also done a year in registration survey for 2022. And they found that only 32% of respondents found that they did not have a structured period of learning on entering the workforce. And for those, 24% said this was less than 3 months when they did have one. So we need to make sure we are supporting those new registrants into the workplace so that they feel supported. And there are findings that are suggesting longer periods of preceptorship lead to an employee feeling much more confident with transitioning into the workplace. And again, this fits with the evidence that Krista has shown as well. Next slide, please. So our programme has been set up with 3 elements. We talk about the pre-preceptorship phase. So what can we do to get people ready to transition into employment? How can we work with our higher education institutes? How can we work with our apprenticeship programs? How can we work with our internationally recruited transition programs to get people ready for employment? We've then got preceptorship, which is around the confidence part. How do we make people feel confident in their autonomous, accountable roles? And then we also have something that we're looking into in the future, which is this foundation level of support, which is where our competencies, our capabilities sit across the 4 pillars of practice to get people ready for enhanced roles. Next slide, please. But this is very much a tailored support offer for preceptorship, because actually what we're aware of is that everyone who enters the workforce has a different story and a different journey into their role. So you've got your individual needs, which will come from your background, which will come from the way you've trained, whether this is your first career, your second career, or your third career, and how you've entered that workforce. You've then got your professional identity, which is built with help from your professional body, BAPO, and helps you to develop in that role as a prosthetist and orthotist. You've then got that opportunity as part of an allied health professions family to have your voice amplified and also to learn and develop in that space together. And then we've got our healthcare workforce where we can work multi-professionally with our nursing and midwifery colleagues, for example. And that's where all of this sits within preceptorship and may look different for different individuals. And we talk very much about tailored support. It's not one size fits all. Next slide, please. So we've already mentioned who preceptorship is for, so I'm not going to dwell on this, but basically it's not just newly qualified members of staff. It is return to practice, internationally educated, those that are coming back from a period of leave, but also those changing sector. So when I talk about changing sector, we're thinking of people who may have come from independent practice or private practice into the NHS, thinking of people who've gone from secondary care into primary care, but also those maybe who are going from NHS services into social care as well. Preceptorship is transitional support. Next slide, please. The benefits for the preceptee is around developing confidence, feeling valued and feeling welcome into the workplace. But for the preceptor, there are also benefits. This sets you up for lifelong learning, but also helps you to develop supportive skills such as communication, coaching skills, mentoring skills that you can use across your 4 pillars of practice as you develop with that continual professional development as well. Next slide, please. So we want more confident AHPs, and then we know we have benefits with regards to recruitment and retention for organisations. But at the heart of this, it's about enhancing the care that we're also providing for patients. And we must keep them at the heart of everything we do with regards to preceptorship, because ultimately we want to improve the care that we are providing. Next slide, please. So earlier in the year, we decided to do a baseline survey of what was actually happening for AHPs. And this was important because we knew there was a very varied landscape. We knew that we had places where we had very good multi-professional programs, but we also knew there was places where AHPs weren't being offered any preceptorship. We did have 172 organisations that responded, and this was across NHS, social care, private, independent, and voluntary organisations. And what I'm really pleased about is we did discuss this with some providers of prosthetic and orthotic services at the BAPO Workforce Summit back in June, and I encouraged them to take part in this survey because we wanted to hear what was being offered for all of our groups. So what you will see is that prosthetists and orthotists are being offered preceptorship in some organisations. We've got 26 organisations that told us that they're offering to prosthetists and orthotists. But what we know in total is that although we've got 64% of those that responded that are offering preceptorship to all AHPs that they have within their organisation, we've still got 12% that aren't being offered anything from those organisations either. So again, we've got our benchmark now, and we know that we can continually improve this with our offering and standardising and providing resources. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. This is just to let you know what's either coming or we've already got available. So you've heard already that we've got the HCPC Preceptorship Principles for Preceptorship coming out. And alongside this for England will be a standards and framework that will be coming out in the next month. This provides some of the background and context, but also tells us what's going on for AHP preceptorship and why it's so important and what are the unique points that we need to consider for AHPs. We talk much more about organisations working with systems And this is very relevant to our prosthetists and orthotists as we think about those companies that are maybe providing, are employing people on private contracts, but are providing NHS services, and how we link things together. How do we link training in across a system? How do we link training with organisations? What can we utilise together in that space? It's also about how we link people together. So it may well be for some of our small and vital professions, they may be the only preceptee of their profession in their organisation. So how do we link them with other people? But also, do they need a preceptor from another organisation but the same profession, or within the same organisation but a different profession? It's thinking slightly creatively as we take that forward. So what we've done is we've taken the 5 principles, we've extrapolated those out to develop 20 standards, and then there's a best practice framework that wraps around that with actions that can be undertaken for best practice. This will also be supported by a preceptorship toolkit of resources, which will have the evidence base, further resources from the research that has been done behind this, full research articles once they've been published, but also templates that can also be used if that's useful. Next slide, please. For pre-preceptorship, we already have something called Step to Work, which is an online program. It's fully available with open access to anybody. So this is open to anyone in an NHS or other organisations. The best thing is we've also ensured that there are licenses available. So those that are internationally recruited can also access this via the eIntegrity portal, and it's free for them to do so. So it can be used as part of your internationally recruited offer for people so that they can get ready and prepare for that transition into their role. It's also part of the AHP International Recruitment Transitional Programme. It's fully accessible online and on mobile devices, and it's very convenient to the learner because they can fill it in, they can drop in and drop out of it and complete the 8 modules over their own time. And there has been research that shows that actually this is really, really useful to people transitioning into roles. Next slide, please. So Mark mentioned about the preceptor and the importance of the preceptor, and we know that they're vital to provide that high quality preceptorship support. So we have developed a multi-professional preceptor ecompendium, which is 5 modules to support across all professional groups. We've done this with nursing and midwifery and AHPs, but it is a fully multi-professional offer. There are 4 units that have already been launched. And the 5th unit will be coming very soon. I'm actually hoping within the next couple of weeks. That's available via the Learning Hub, but the thing I will say is there should be free open access within the next couple of months, but we're just waiting for some of the changes with regards to legislation just to make that fully accessible to everybody. Next slide, please. The last thing I just wanted to let you know is we also have a digital platform that's a repository of resources. And within this, which is called our Learning Hub, which is what NHS England are using moving forward. Within this, there are professional resources. There's a folder that is specially for prosthetists and orthotists, and very happy to have, we've got all the links for BAPO's information, but any case studies, anything you want to share with us about your preceptorship programs or your experience, we would be glad to link to or to share via that website. Next slide, please. So my last slide has just got our information on it, which I know Krista will share with you. Please note we do have a new email address, but we do have a program webpage, and we do also have a monthly newsletter which has all of our events, all of our resources, and any information that we want to share with people. Thank you, and I'll hand back over. Thank you, Peter.
Marvellous, Amanda. Yes, thank you very much. I know we're kind of not quite on time, I think, which is probably my fault. So, but what I'd like to do now is invite our 2 preceptees. We've got from Steve's organisation, Georgina Days, and Peacocks, we've got Steely Geddes. So if you could introduce yourself, Georgina first, and then for Ailey to follow, and just tell your stories. I think it's probably the most important part of this evening, is that we hear your voice, we hear your experience, and that we learn from you and with you. So please, Georgina.
Hello, thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm George Days. I'm an orthotist in Steeper in Leeds, and I started at Steeper straight away after leaving Salford back in June 22. So I think the preceptorship was pretty new when I first started, and I was saying earlier that when I started I didn't even know what a preceptorship was, so we didn't have all this information then, which is great that we're kind of bringing like that now. So I got assigned with my preceptor almost straight away after starting, essentially. And I knew her anyway because I was doing my placement there. So it was quite nice that we could have those one-to-ones and we could organise time together, so that I could then transition into properly working and not being a student anymore. And discuss the things that I was struggling with and everything that I needed help with as I was being my own clinician and starting out eventually. So because I did join a team that I already knew, I've been with them for 4 months for my placement, the support that I did get was quite on demand and everyone was happy to kind of help. But the preceptorship itself allowed us to have specific times set aside at least every 3 months. So initially we booked it every 3 months to discuss and plan all the goals that I had for the quarter. And workbook fill out so that all the essentials were kind of covered, so insoles and footwear and AFOs. But because it's very tailored to you, I could just change things, so it was very versatile. And if I wasn't kind of on target to reach that just because of the way the clinic was going in 3 months, I could maybe swap it with something that was at the 6 month mark. And then Chantel, who was my preceptor, she was my one-on-one supervisor anyway, so we got together every month, which was quite good. So we got together every month just for supervision, and then every 3 months to discuss the preceptorship specifically. The workbook itself was kind of to make sure that everything was done, because it can be so easily like forgotten in clinic that you do need to sign these things off as you go. You need to make sure that you are confident in doing them, because otherwise you'll kind of get stuck with them and you might not know you're doing it right. You might know if that's what you should be doing. And especially with myself, half of the time that I was at uni was in COVID. So some of the things I didn't even learn at uni, which is strange. And the reflection part of the preceptorship. So in the workbook and with the supervision, you could then reflect on everything that you've done, all the good, all the bad. And I think kind of after my graduation, having that written documentation of how the progress was going, and the fact that my manager could see it, my supervisor could see it, and then kind of everyone could see it, I could then be offered additional training days and CPD opportunities to kind of complement my learning in clinic. And it translated everything that I'd gained at university into actually working in a clinic. So it just gave me a really, really well needed structure initially within the company, to establish myself as a clinician. And it also gave me the ability to kind of reflect on myself. And you really need to reflect, and that's one of like the biggest learning things for me, is that if you can reflect on yourself, you'll know what to do better in the future, you know what you've done well, especially because sometimes it can be hard to kind of look on what you've done good, and it's hard to give yourself a pat on the back. So learning that just can help me, or help anyone who's doing a preceptorship in the future, kind of progress as a clinician in whatever they want to do. So I'm very happy that I did do one. I'm grateful for Steeper for kind of offering me that and telling me that's what I want, that's what I need to do.
Fantastic. That sounds like it was a really positive experience and a really positive story. I'd like to thank you for sharing that, Georgia. Now, you're very welcome. So now, Ellie, could you give us your testimonial, please?
Hi, so my name's Steely Geddes. I'm one of the orthotists working for Peacocks in the northeast of England. So my preceptorship was slightly different to Georgia's. Our preceptorship sort of followed a sort of a more loose sort of graduate clinical development program. So in that, I was assigned a supervisor, a preceptor, and a mentor. So two separate individuals that were there to help me through my progression from starting fresh out of uni into work. My first 6 months in the job was solely focused on just shadowing in clinics. I got to shadow in different clinics. And because I'm based in the northeast, I got to work across multiple different NHS trusts. So I was able to work with different orthotists in those clinics, which I thought was great because, as Peter mentioned earlier, was that it gives different perspectives and different allows you to see how different individuals work, and it helped me sort of take bits and bobs from what people were learning from and how I could learn and use that in my own practice. So that was my first sort of 6 months, was doing the sort of very gradual general shadowing in the general clinics. And then as I became a little bit more confident, I was having regular meetings with my supervisor and my mentor, discussing things, what I needed to work on, what I was feeling like I was seeing a lot of or not enough of. And we would sort of discuss where and which clinics I would want to be sort of more focused in. So I got the opportunity after about 6 months to start shadowing in sort of more specialised clinics, expanding my knowledge and experience in the sort of more paediatric, the more specialist areas, which I thought was really great, because I started off in the general, building up my knowledge with that, and then once I felt a bit more confident, I got to gradually build up. Alongside all my shadowing, as well as that, I had the specific days and time that I could have specifically for admin and CPD. So there I would be able to go into the office and speak to my mentor or the orthotists that were on site, and chat to them and progress my learning that way. But as well as my as well as the shadowing and the allocated CPD time, I did have regular training days. So that was organised either out with the company, so through external speakers, or with the company. So I had footwear training days and casting sessions with my clinicians, as well as we had external companies coming in and doing workshops with myself and the other graduates at the time, on how to have difficult conversations with patients and things like that, which again I found very beneficial, because not everybody is easy that you deal with in clinics, and it's good to have that knowledge with how to deal with having those conversations. So my preceptorship program was not maybe as structured, and I didn't have quite as many feedback sessions with my preceptor and my mentor, but I did find that with the shadowing and increasing in the sort of specialist clinics, I was able to feel more confident once I finally got my own clinics. And as well as I sort of transitioned into the going from the shadowing stage into the doing my own clinics, I always felt that there was always another orthotist on site doing their own clinic, so I was still able to call on them if I needed a hand. And slowly through my 2 years in the the programme, I've now sort of started developing, doing my own clinics off-site, away from other orthotists. But I know with my mentors and my preceptors that if I needed them, I could still give them a call, and they would be able to offer their help. And we still do regular check-ins and catch-ups with them, just to make sure that everything is still okay, even though we've technically come to an end of our programme. But it's one of these things that I know with Peacocks, they're constantly developing their preceptor programme and learning from the sort of next clinicians that are coming in. So the graduates that have just started now have all started a very slightly different programme to what I was on, taking the comments that myself and my colleagues at the time were making comment on. So I really thought it's definitely good transition from going from uni into working careers, and it was a really, really positive experience for me.
Thank you, Ailey. So yes, really, really interested to hear both your experience and the transition and the way the programme there in the North East is developing for those coming onto the programme. So we've now got the opportunity for some questions and hopefully answers. So if people want to raise their hand, and we can take those questions verbally, or if you prefer, you can drop a question into the chat. Just while we're waiting, I probably got a question for Ailey and Georgia. Did you? How much learning did you get from colleagues at a similar level of experience? Were you conscious of that? Ailey, perhaps first.
So from my when I first started, there was 3 other graduates that started at the same time as me, and we were doing the programme together. It was just myself in the Northeast, and the others were down south. So we didn't have regular catch-ups with each of them, but we did try, and when we had our training sessions, we would have time to sort of see how they're getting on, see where they were at. In terms of experience with the orthotists that were in my area, I think the person next up from me had been in the profession 5 years, so she was fairly new into it, and still got to shadow with her and learn with from her experiences, and everyone's still catching up, and we're learning each day from each one of us.
Georgia, have you got anything you could share with us about learnings from those in early career, similar to yourself, or maybe just a little bit more experience?
Pretty similar to Ailey, that I was like the only graduate at work, essentially. There was a colleague who'd started a year before me, so graduated a year before me, and they were actually a really good help while I was still a student, and then going into work as a part of the team, not essentially learning officially anymore, and I was meant to be fully qualified and everything, but because they were like quite soon out of university, they got to give me a lot of information that I didn't get at uni because I wasn't there with COVID and everything like that. And it was all quite fresh in their mind, so they could easily pass it on to me. Whereas I think sometimes with people who've been around quite a long time, it can be difficult to kind of miss things, because it's easy to forget it, or easy to pass it, or easy to forget to pass it on, at least, because it just comes so natural to some of the ones who are more established in the career. So I had a little bit of learning experience with someone at a similar level, but they have now left. So it kind of leaves me, and then I'm the oldest graduate there now. So
I'm sure you'll be looking forward to sharing your experiences in the years to come. So James Carter's just popped a question in the chat, and again, I think this is directed to both yourself, Georgia, and Ailey. As a new preceptee, were you given the programme in advance to understand the timescale? So, Georgia, do you want to take that one first? Do you get the question? Do you want me to repeat it?
Oh, please, could you repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah. So, as a new preceptee, were you given the programme in advance so you could understand the timescale?
Not necessarily in advance to starting work. It was just given at the start of when I started the job. So I started the job at the end of June 22, and I was told that week, this is kind of what you're doing, but you're not kind of rushed to do any work when you first start anyway. You are shadowing and you are kind of getting used to the team, and there's no expectation of you for those first couple of weeks anyway. So you have that time to yourself to then go over the workbook and the workload and all the different things that you're going to be doing in the next year or so, to make sure you kind of are ready for the preceptorship. But with me starting in 22, it was quite a new thing anyway, so there wasn't much information on it to begin with. So you just had to take it as it came. But it was that structure that was welcome to me.
Thanks. Ailey, did your experience differ in any way to what George has just described?
No, so mine was very similar to Georgia. I first day I got given a booklet to say this is the program that you're going to be doing. But my first week was an induction week, so we had time to go through it and discuss with with my preceptor. So it was kind of thrown in, but it was really easy to follow along, and sort of the time scale was mapped out. But as we've all mentioned, that it was kind of tailored to each individual. So if we were moving a bit quicker than what the time scale was, then great. If we were going a bit slower, then we would tailor it around that. So yeah, I got mine the first day I started.
Lovely. Okay. We've got a couple more questions. We're going to wrap up about 1:15, so we're going to allow ourselves the luxury of talking about preceptorship for a few minutes longer. But for those of you that want of places to go, we will close at 1:15. But Anushka's asking, is there any preceptorship program for associate practitioners once they become registered with P&O? So I guess that's a question to BAPO, I would suggest. So I'll pass a comment to that and see if Krista wants to add anything to that. So when in the sense of associate practitioners, I think are you thinking support workers here? So for the moment, we don't have, I believe, a preceptorship program as a professional body for support workers who would. So they wouldn't become registered as such, but they could join BAPO or enter the field of prosthetics and orthotics at that level below sort of the qualification that a graduate would have. Amanda, is this something that other professions are looking at in terms of onboarding for support workers?
There are some organisations that do offer preceptorship support for support workers. It's mainly sort of your physio or OT assistants that are linked in with that. But I think the question sort of also asking, once they become registered, then of course that preceptorship support is there for them, because that's part of that transition. So yes, there should be what we talked about earlier, is people can come in from different journeys to become registered individuals. So yes, they can definitely access that. But it's something the National AHP Support Worker Programme, we are having conversations about this, and we've been doing a bit of joint work looking at support worker needs and transitions and their supervision, accountability and delegation. And there is some work that I think will be ongoing looking at this potentially as more links into that as well. So basically watch this space.
Yeah, and I'm guessing there's always a facility to offer multi-professional programs that cross the AHP space, and I know that trusts where I've been involved recently, that we've been able to put our prosthetists and orthotists onto those trust-wide programs, and support workers would lend themselves well. But yeah, I possibly misunderstood your question there, Anushka, and it could be that you're talking about the route through the apprenticeship into. Well, I'd imagine through an apprenticeship route, you would get quite a lot of support through being on the apprenticeship program itself as you became a registered practitioner. James's question.
Sorry, I just wanted to also comment to that as well.
Oh yeah, please do.
Yes, because I had a similar experience. So they are, I think, trusts who have associate practitioners who assist orthotists and prosthetists, and they get these roles as prosthetists, orthotists from other countries, but are not registered with the HCPC yet. And I think that as a good rule of practice, it should be that once you transition or once you get employment as a prosthetist orthotist, you should still have a preceptorship program, even though you've worked with that team before, even though you already know what's going on. And I'll just use that same breath and answer one of the last questions there from Laura. So ideally, I think the best practice is, and Amanda and Mark can help me out here, is 12 months. So preceptorship should last 12 months. Some people progress faster than others, but ideally it should be 12 months. So for someone who was an associate practitioner within the same organization and now has become a prosthetist orthotist, you could come down and say, okay, maybe not 12 months, maybe we'll just do 6, 8, bare minimum 6 months, but ideally it should be 12 months.
Yeah, so I think, and we'll just finish with James has popped another one in there just about, I think it's just one for either Ailey or Georgia to come back on in terms of.
Could I just pick up on that last one
please.
around the time frame though, which is one of the key things in stating time frames is the idea that preceptorship is tailored. So although there's sort of an expectation of a certain period of time, I think as Krista said, it shouldn't be seen as being you must do it for 12 months if you don't need it, or you can only do it for 12 months, you can't do it for shorter. So certainly our principles talk about tailoring to the need of the preceptor or the preceptees. And as we've talked about these different transition moments, it may well be that 12 months is more suitable for people who are newly qualified or coming to work in the UK for the first time. Whereas somebody who's coming back to practice, it might be 6 months, it might be 8 months. But the most important thing is the relationship between the preceptee and their preceptor and organisation in setting out the terms of that preceptorship offer for them, because it's very much, certainly from our perspective, should be focused around their needs and supporting them to get their confidence. So what we don't want to do is, and this is why we set principles, is to set hard and fast rules. We want to encourage people to be thoughtful when they're thinking about preceptorship offers and taking up preceptorship.
Right, thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. So that's now we are just reaching the close in terms of time. I know there's a couple more questions. One's been popped into the Q&A and one in the chat box, but as time has passed, Krista, is there a means by which we can answer those questions for people after the event? Could we publish a response to those questions? Yes.
What I could do is potentially just have all of the questions that were asked into a document and send it alongside all the other resources that have been shared today. And I think if anyone else has a question, you can always reach out to the Secretariat or myself, and we'll try our best to get you an answer as well.
Yes, we'll definitely, we will do that, won't we, Krista? So yes. We'll get that done. And with the team will support you in doing that. So thank you all very much for coming on this evening. Personally, I've really enjoyed listening to the breadth of speakers that we've had. And I'd really like to thank Krista for all the work you've put in organising the session and delivering it with such finesse is what I would say. Definitely, always a pleasure to listen to you, and particularly to Ellie and Georgia. Really, it's great to hear the voices of our future playing out in front of us as some of us reach the twilight of our career. So yeah, it's good to know the world is in good hands. And also to our invited speakers, Amanda and Mark, huge thanks to them for the preparation they put in terms of their presentations. So I'd just like to wish everyone a really pleasant evening and a great future in P&O. So good night all.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Thank
you, everyone. Good night.